So these are all movements where people have actually tried to claim that for all matters that affect our lives, we should be the ones who are taking decisions or be central to the decision making. We can't leave it to governments and corporations and so on. Swaraj is actually a very old concept in India. It comes from ancient scriptures. And then during the independence movement against the British colonial rule, it was popularized by many different movements, such as, for instance, the movement on indigo and others, where the British were trying to take control over our production systems, our agriculture, and so on. And then Gandhi brought it, especially in his book Hind Swaraj and then in the movement. But what's important is to realize that it's not just about India's independence from colonial rule or a nation's independence. It's actually much more about an individual and a community's autonomy and freedom, but in responsibility to other people's and other communities' autonomy and freedom, which means it encompasses a deeply ethical way of being, of living. It encompasses my self-restraint so that I don't impinge on the rights of others to live. In India, the concept of development has been taken wholesale from the West in that sense, and we have imposed it. All successive governments have imposed it either through state socialism or now increasingly through capitalism. It means that GDP growth has to happen at any cost, which means you can cut down forests, you can drain out a wetland, you can do anything, you can displace millions of people in the pursuit of this kind of development. Unfortunately, in modernized development, we seem to think of ourselves as apart from nature. We have to figure out how we are actually part of it, reinsert ourselves, understand that other species have their own right to exist, that everything around us has a spirit or a being or is something in itself which needs to be respected. Over the last 40 years, what I've seen is a lot of communities in India and other parts of the world that are actually practicing, in some senses, different notions of Swaraj. For instance, women farmers in different parts of the country claiming food sovereignty, which means complete control over everything to do with food, the seeds, the land, the water, the knowledge. Or movements to reclaim community control over forests in central India and other parts of the country. You build in the notion of Swaraj, which is a deeply political and economic concept of independence and autonomy, as I said, but also the responsibility to the rest of nature, and so Eco Swaraj, but also a radical ecological democracy in the sense of trying to rescue the word democracy from its currently liberal interpretation, where we think elections is about democracy. Actually, democracy is about power of the people. No? We each have within ourselves inherent power to take decisions or be part of decision making. Many other values that are explicit or implicit in this, for instance, the value of solidarity, not competition but cooperation, the value of working with nature as a commons, not as private property, the value of rights of all species, the value of living simply, because if you consume more and more and more, you are actually impinging on the rights of other communities or on other species. The value of diversity, so that I respect your ethics and your ideologies and your beliefs and faiths, and you respect mine. So you have to fundamentally alter the economy in order for people to have much more control over their own productive resources, and in order for these sorts of occupations also to gain respect and be something that also encourages young people to get into them, rather than everybody running towards IT and machinery and industries and so on. Self-reliance or Atmanirbharta has become quite a buzzword in India these days. Everybody seems to realize that the COVID crisis tells us that we have to be self-reliant. But the way in which it's being meant and the kind of packages that are being pushed are actually pushing people more and more towards commercialization, privatization. With Eco Swaraj, many things happen. One is that, for instance, we make the centralized state much less important. Probably it even withers away. And each of us begins to understand how we can take control over our own lives with, as I said, responsibility for others, as collectives, as communities, wherever we are.